Today we're going to do a video on changing a broken stub shaft on this buggy I have here. Lo bought this buggy. I built this thing over a couple years time. Started out on a really tight budget, just collecting parts and it started out as an '88 Toyota 4Runner years and years ago. It was my daily driver for a long time, and it slowly morphed into this thing. Anyways, it's as you can see, it was a 4Runner. There's a little bit of frame under here left, not much of it. It's sitting on 1-ton axles, Dana 60, Dana 60s front and rear. The rear's out of an early 70s Ford, the front's out of a 92 Dodge Cummins, all stuff I scrounged for next to nothing over the years. The tires are 46 by 20 inch wide Baja claws. They're, I spent a few bucks on them. I got them used, but the motor I built for a friend of mine years ago. It's a Blueprint and Balance 400 small block with a forged Eagle rotating assembly and Brodix heads. It's relatively mild cam. It's probably in the 450 horse range. I built it for a friend of mine's K30 years ago, and he ran it for less than a year and kind of got lost interest in 4x and off-road, and then I ended up with the truck, and I gave him a few bucks for the motor, and I put it in this with the trans. It's a Turbo 400. That was built for that same Chevy. It was a 79 K30. On the back of the Turbo 400, I've got a 203, 205 doubler set up. It's a Northwest Fab doubler. Is definitely pretty quality when I put it together. I was really happy with that. The rear's spooled. Right now it's still 30 spline. It's got chromoly 30 spline axles. I know they're not the best, but it's what I could afford when I was putting this thing together. I've got 538 gears in both axles. The front's got a welded diff. Also kind of ghetto, but it's worked. But axles, that's what I've had issues with. So yesterday, I took this thing out on its maiden voyage out in the snow. I'll post a couple videos of that. This is maiden voyage in general. I have not got to use this thing yet since I built it. And yesterday was its first day, and it did really well. I'm really happy with it. Really happy with it. The front's 4-length with Kings that I had tuned for the weight of this thing, which is, that did cost a few bucks, but I think it was worth it. Trying to think what else about this thing. It's full hydraulic steering. But yesterday on its maiden voyage, I broke yet another axle. Up until the last big transformation, this rig had a 22R in it still, and still had it was a built 22R that I built. I'm a motor builder. Mainly diesels, big diesels. I've done that for years, rebuilt big diesel engines for people. That's what I am by trade originally. But yeah, I had a built 22R, and with that 22R I managed to break 7 chromoly 30 spline rear axles, Yukon axles, and I had broken 1 stub shaft in the front. And as of yesterday, I've now broken a second front stub shaft, the other one. Anybody that knows much about these Dodge axles, the inners are 35 spline, they're okay. The outers, the stub shaft, here I'll go get one. The stub shafts are only 30 spline, and these things are a bit vulnerable. You can convert them to 35, I just haven't done it yet. Ideally I'd like to put a set of RCVs or something in this thing, but that's big money, and I'll get there eventually, but I'm just not quite there yet. And as it stands, these are pretty easy to change. You're probably wondering why I don't just buy 35 spline outers, because they'll go right in. I even have a set of old hubs laying in the back there. But the reason for that is because then, in my mind, the inner shaft will now be the weak point. And I'd rather replace these than the inner shafts. These are pretty easy to do. It's a similar job. The difference is when they break, it's easy to get all the broken parts out. Versus the inner shafts, they like to break near the differential. And they're a pain in the butt to get all the broken material out of. Once you have a bunch of broken material in the diff, you got to clean the whole diff out. So I keep using these 30 spline outers, and they're okay, and this will be the second one I've broken. And they're relatively cheap. They're like $250 or something like that. The rear, I need to just go through. The problem is to fit any bigger than 30 spline in this rear end, I think I've got to put different spindles, or bore out the spindle tubes, or put different spindle tubes on. And that's a bit of a project. So I might just try to hunt down a different Dana 60, put my ring and pinion in, and yeah, if you can find a Dana 60 out of a later era truck, they'll have 35 splines. Factory. And this one actually had 15 spline axles factory, and I upgraded to 30 splines. And they've been okay, but I've still broken, like I said, 7 of them with a 22R. Now I've got a big V8. My thought process here is, because it's a big V8 with an automatic, I might break less stuff. The 22R I had in this thing previous was a pretty nasty little motor. It made power all the way past 7,000-8,000 RPM. It spun to 9,000 RPM. I had stiffer valve springs in it. With 2mm oversized one-piece stainless valves with a tighter coil behind. I had a big lift cam in it. I don't remember what the lift is off the top of my head. It was ported, and I had the head ported, and then I match ported the head to an Offenhauser intake with a Weber 38, and that was match ported to a full-length header. I was running, that engine flowed well enough that I was running to get it to tune properly, I was running the biggest jets I could get for a Weber 38 in it, and it wasn't quite enough. It was still right on that edge of okay, but it was a nasty little motor. But that being said, it still made all its power in the top end, and because of that, to get big tires spinning, you'd have to rev it up and dump the clutch over, and those big high RPM clutch dumps broke stuff. I broke axles. It was a trail gear, twin transfer case doubler. I broke that. I broke all sorts of stuff, and lots of drive lines, stuff like that. And that shock load of dumping the clutch, and I had to run a full metallic LC Engineering race clutch just to keep the thing together. Before that clutch, I went through like 5 clutches. Within every one of them lasted me one good weekend of wheeling, and they were smoked with that little motor. So that's where the V8 came in. I had the V8 laying around. Like I said, I bought it off my buddy, and I had actually built it for him. And I think we'll see. I've only been out of this motor and this setup one day so far, and I broke one axle shaft and had a couple other little issues, but nothing major. Nothing you wouldn't expect for a first day on the trail with a new rig. It did really well. I was really, really happy with it. So let's get on to changing the axle shaft.